Part 19. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 187. There is a main scene in this story world, which is a very retro old hotel. The guest rooms, restaurants, and conference rooms in the hotel make up the three most important parts. But there are many ancillary scenes, such as the first sea and the second desert. These scenes are much more unreal than the hotel scene. Many places are contrary to common sense, and they are enough to show the distinction between priority and secondary. At this time, in a cave, each audience member was hung on the rock wall, and some were tied by snakes. However, the snakes were already dead, but the dead snake bodies were like sticks stuck to the rock wall. Like a rope, it fixed the audience who was already on the verge of death. Another part was held by monkeys on the rock wall. Similarly, these sand monkeys were also dead, their bodies were petrified, and the corpses and the rock wall were almost fused together, fixing the audience on the rock wall. This chain and cage model is indeed novel and interesting enough. Of course, it is also very scary. Gradually, the audience began to wake up one after another. They were as listless as stovetops that had been drained of their energy. Su Zhenzhen and Lu Tao were both tied to the rock wall with snake bodies. They were very close to each other. The first thing they did after waking up was to look around and count the number of people. 17 people. There are only 17 people. There is one less. Su Zhenzhen opened her mouth and made a mouth shape, a su. Lu Tao nodded. He understood what Su Zhenzhen meant. There was one missing Subai. Yes, one Subai is missing. Both of them lowered their heads at this time, but their hearts did not feel as if the current situation was as difficult as it was. Instead, they felt like they were breathing a long sigh of relief. According to experience, there are 18 people, now 17 people are here, and there is one person who has not shown up. Then when the third round of voting starts, that person should be the one with the most votes. Zhao Zhen was gloriously selected to die in the first round because of his initial attack on Subai and his almost blind vanity and arrogance. Qian Lan was a good person who showed random kindness, or wanted to gamble. In the end, the audience she helped turned against her and voted her to death. Basically, there will be a scene before each round of voting, and this scene will also evolve into a plot, which can often distinguish one person from the whole. And the person who is separated will basically become the highest vote getter in the next round of voting and go to the gallows. This time, that person was Subai. Su Zhenzhen guessed that Subai's actions had touched the bottom line of the story world, so Subai was killed in such a way. In fact, according to Su Zhenzhen's opinion, Subai was still alive. For those who couldn't vote in 2 rounds, there were myself, Chen Xinyi and Lu Tao who got 3 votes in each round, keeping Subai in second place. With constant exposure, it would be Subai's turn sooner or later. This is just like advertising. Some advertisements spend money on advertising overwhelmingly. It seems like a waste of money, but in fact, after forming a psychological suggestion in the audience's mind, they may need this kind of advertising at a certain point in time and place in the future. When he sees a product on the supermarket shelf, he will be more inclined to buy the one he has seen on TV commercials before. In fact, Subai also knew this. Several kept voting for him in second place, and he had already lost his presence to other listeners twice. This was really not good for him. That's why Subai finally went too far and wanted to exchange his life with Chen Xinyi. Anyway, he couldn't live for 2 rounds. It was better to drag someone who voted for him to die with him than to die alone after being voted out and unable to do anything. All the listeners woke up, and everyone was very sluggish. Half of them had extremely serious burns on their bodies. These people had fainted after being roasted in the desert. There was almost no intact skin left on their bodies, but after all, this kind of roasting was not as direct as fire. It is as direct as burning, and every time these people faint and are about to die, Sand monkeys will come out of the sand around them and drag the audience away. Despite this, although life is still there, it has been tortured to death on the outside and tender on the inside. Each of them looks like he is dying. But the audience is not ordinary people after all. To use a more cliché expression, they all have their heads tied to their waists. People who are struggling for life will continue to struggle as long as they are breathing. Everything, in order to survive. Many people began to count people and look at the people around them. The audience members Lu Tao and Su Zhenzhen were covered in bruises and black lips. They were poisoned. Perhaps one of the most tragic things in life is to see a pool of clear water when you are about to die of thirst in the desert. And the water is poisonous. The toxicity is very strong, and it is related to people. The stronger the person, the stronger the toxicity. Therefore, Su Zhenzhen and Lu Tao are also listless at this time. This is not the so-called golden mean in disguise, but a true portrayal. There are 17 people hanging on the cave wall. Below, there is an underground river. The water in the underground river is very cold, because even if you hang on it, you can feel the constant chill coming from below, and you can even see some ice floes appearing. At this time, the 18th person that many people were thinking about appeared. When a relatively large ice floe was flowing here, it was blocked by a protruding rock, and the ice floe was shaken. Subai, who had already had a layer of frost on his body, woke up leisurely at this time. It took him about half a minute to free his body from the stiff state. 2 Hellfire shotguns and 1 were fired. He tied a tight knot on his waist with a belt buckle and held it tightly in his hand. Because his body gradually stiffened during the drift, even if Subai fell asleep and entered a short dormant stage, the gun was still firmly in Subai's hand. Slowly, Subai crawled out of the ice floe and came to the ground. One of his arms was missing, and there were many other wounds on his body. Coupled with the image at this time, he could completely kneel on the overpass in the real world, begging for food below. In fact, Subai is really no better than those people who were hung on the rock wall. After all, he and Chen Yuxin hurt each other before entering this scene. However, Subai is at least free now, while those on the rock wall have lost their freedom. Moreover, a very important point is that the 2 Hellfire shotguns are still on his body. So hungry, so cold, Subai muttered to himself. What he wants to do most now is to have a meal first, then take a hot bath, then lie down on a soft bed and have a good sleep. Kill. Suddenly I didn't feel anything anymore. After all, I am so tired now. Subai touched his head lightly with the butt of the gun, and cursed himself for being crazy. Don't you want to kill people? Now 17 people are hanging here as living targets for you to choose from. Why are you suddenly too lazy to kill them? Raising his head, Subai let out a low growl from his throat. It was a sound similar to that of a beast, but full of exhaustion. Subai's eyes began to sweep over the people on the rock wall one after another. Those people, when they saw his gaze, subconsciously avoided it. Obviously, the previous scene of Subai and Chen Yuxin dying together had been imprinted in their minds. Subai's madness at that time, the kind of complete disregard for his own life. The no-nonsense attitude really makes them afraid from the bottom of their hearts, because such a person has no scruples, has nothing to care about, has no character weaknesses, and no handles or weaknesses to take advantage of. When Subai's eyes fell on Chen Yuxin looked at Subai and smiled, as if to say, "Come on, shoot, we haven't died together before, let's do it this time." But Subai did not fire, but continued to move his eyes and looked over. His eyes stayed on Lu Tao and Su Zhenzhen for a while longer than others. Su Zhenzhen and Lu Tao held their breath subconsciously. They were very nervous. They were afraid that Subai would suddenly change his mind and not fight with Chen Yuxin, but fight with himself. Because they were not sure about Subai's context at all, perhaps their mood at this time was similar to that of the monk back then. However, the current thinking pattern in Sudbai's mind is really incomprehensible to the 17 people on the rock wall. Because these 17 people are all normal and rational, they cannot understand and empathize with a mentally ill person. What Sudbai thinks now is that if he kills one of them, he will die too. But now I really want to eat something, take a hot bath, and then lie down on a soft bed to sleep. Whether you die or not is a matter of time, but if you die now, you won't be able to enjoy those things. Never mind. Sudbai raised the gun in his hand. The heartbeats of everyone on the rock wall slowed down a beat. Boom. Boom. Bang. 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 The shackles on everyone were interrupted by Sudbai's extravagant use of hellfire shotgun bullets. Everyone fell down and regained their freedom. At this time, as Sudbai expected, the surrounding people the scene changed instantly, from an underground cave to a hotel restaurant. Sudbai didn't care about the confused looks everyone was looking at him. He just took a plate, filled it with a large plate of Yangzhou fried rice, added some grilled sausages, took a bottle of red wine, and limped along. Go to your room. In the room, Sudbai devoured the meal, and finally drank the expensive red wine as if it were beer. He let out a sigh of contentment and walked into the bathroom. Hot water washed his body and wounds. Although it hurts, it is very comfortable. Afterwards, Sudbai stopped wiping himself and lay directly on his bed. Soon, slight snoring sounded. The next day, when the sun shone through the window and Sudbai had to open his eyes to wake up, he saw a line of words on the ceiling. Please go to the conference room. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 188. Sudbai yawned, ate, drank, took a bath and slept. Now he felt much more comfortable and full of energy. At least he was not as exhausted as before when he was in the world of ice and fire. At that time, Sudbai first, he had a mental illness and hurt each other with Chen Yuxin. At that time, he was already heavily rewarded, and then he was thrown into the desert and into the ice pool and tossed back and forth. This was a great deal for both the spirit and the body. Torture. In fact, sometimes people can't see clearly what they really need. Often, the so-called great enlightenment and discovery of what they really want are only achieved after experiencing major blows and setbacks, especially for such precarious situations. For the audience. Alive. It seems to be the greatest satisfaction. When living becomes a very luxurious thing, you will suddenly find that many other so-called pursuits and ideals in real life suddenly become very pale and weak. For example, Sudbai has lost an arm now. Apart from complaining about the inconvenience, he really doesn't care much. If he is still alive at the end of the mission, then all his injuries will be restored. If he is already dead at the end of the mission, then there was no need to care. After all, who would care about missing arms and legs? It's not like the eunuch had to sew the precious lump back together before burying it. Sudbai was not that pretentious. After changing into fresher clothes, Sudbai walked out of his room. There was only his own footsteps in the corridor, which seemed a bit empty and quiet. I passed the restaurant first, but there was no one in the restaurant. I guess I overslept. In the end, the rules of this story world made me wake up. The others probably had breakfast and went to the conference room to sit down. Alone. Sudbai was not in a hurry, nor panicked. He even took a plate to put some siomai steamed buns on it, then grabbed a cup of soy milk and walked into the conference room with a bunch of food. He was really like a leader. Likewise, the most important character appears at the last moment. There were 17 people sitting in the conference room. When Sudbai walked in, almost everyone looked at Sudbai subconsciously. Indeed, the key figure in the third round of voting was Subai. In the eyes of many people, in his heart, Subai was already equated with Zhao Zhen, who died in the first round, and Qian Lan, who died in the second round. Subai was calm and composed. This time, he found that Lu Tao was sitting where he had been sitting. Lu Tao ignored Subai and lowered his head, as if he could neither hear nor see anything. Well, Subai simply walked to the front and sat down in the front seat. He was about to die, but he still wanted to grab his seat. He really had no tutor. A death row prisoner can still have a good meal before his execution. What a stingy guy. Subai was thinking this while putting the breakfast he brought on the conference table. Next to him were the corpses of Qian Lan and Zhao Zhen. Zhao Zhen was a little better, but his head fell off. Qian Yan's limbs were separated from his body and turned into human sticks. It was very miserable. Subai was in this environment, eating breakfast very comfortably. The aroma of the food mixed with the slightly fishy smell of blood made Subai's appetite even better. Subai enjoyed this feeling, eating a fragrant and hot breakfast next to the corpse in full view of everyone. This kind of treatment it's hard to imagine in the real world, but in the story world, this is actually a common occurrence, but this story world is more special, more rigorous, and more depressing, so for a while, Subai's behavior at this time seemed so unique. Sure enough, it can also be understood as, the jar is broken. You know you are going to die soon, why can't you be a little arrogant? After eating a few steamed buns, Subai suddenly realized that he didn't have a straw. How could he drink the soy milk? He punctured the bag of soy milk with his fingernails, and some of the soy milk sprayed out and landed on the body. Subai didn't care. He caught the mouth of the bag with his mouth and sucked the warm soy milk inside, eating it with relish. In the entire conference room, there was only the sound of Subai chewing food. Subai did not deliberately lower his voice. Even Subai usually ate slowly by himself because since his parents died, he was used to sitting alone. Eating quietly at the dinner table, it was only at this time that maybe he could let go of all his previous inhibitions and have some fun like other young people. The rules of this story world were actually very respectable at this time. It was not until Subai finished breakfast and wiped his hands on his clothes that the list began to appear on the table. Subai was neither in a hurry nor panicked. He held the list in his hand and raised it, attracting everyone's attention to him. After you have eaten and drank enough, you can go on the road. You all surrender to me. You are relieved. Brothers and sisters, don't be embarrassed. Anyway, I can see it. We are all listeners. No one knows when he will die. Anyway, don't feel any psychological pressure. In a word, it doesn't matter if I die, I won't let you go if I'm a ghost anyway. Except for Subai's voice, there was no other voice in the conference room. Lu Tao sneered in his heart. In his eyes, Subai's performance at this time was completely out of position. He knew that Subai would definitely die this time and many people would vote for him, so he thought that he had no choice but to vote for him at this time. If necessary, to add icing on the cake, his eyes first glanced at Su Zhenzhen. Su Zhenzhen seemed to be looking at Lu Tao at this time, and the two people's eyes met in an instant. Immediately, Lu Tao looked at Chen Yuxin, and Su Zhenzhen nodded silently. Instead of following the crowd and adding icing on the cake to Subai's already overwhelming votes, it is better to deal with a poor woman who has already broken her leg. Of course, the reason why this woman is pitiful is not because everyone bullies her, but because she worships her. Given by Subai. Subai must have received the highest votes in this round. Now, a new second place can be elected to replace Subai's previous position to increase his presence. Lu Tao and Chen Yuxin both checked. Many people also started to tick, including Chen Yuxin. Chen Yuxin bit her lip. She didn't know why, but she already felt a sense of crisis. In fact, if you think about this feeling carefully, you can also analyze the reasons. This is exposure. In this voting rule, it is certain that the first bird will be shot, so those who do not know how to cover themselves, such as Zhao Zhen and Qian Lan, here, the best way to survive is to ignore everyone, but because Subai found someone that day, the two of them had a vigorous quarrel with each other in the room. Many people were deeply impressed by themselves and saw their own strength. They even saw from Subai's questions out of his own mind. This is just like when a star cheats on an ordinary girl, the girl will also be exposed and become famous. Subai burned himself, and incidentally illuminated Chen Yuxin. Chen Yuxin was sitting in the middle seat, and Su Zhenzhen and Lu Tao were always sitting in the back row, so Chen Yuxin couldn't see them, but she was sure that after killing Subai, she would be the next one to be shot. On the list, Chen Yuxin thought about it and hesitated for a long time under Subai's photo. No matter what, she must make preparations and preparations first, and even make preparations similar to Subai's. Anyway, Subai is definitely going to die, what about my vote? Chen Yuxin's chest began to rise and fall, then she gritted her teeth and put a check mark on Subai's list. No matter what, Subai, you'd better die first. You are already ready to die anyway. Is not it? Faced with Subai's careless response to the call, most people seemed to be uncomfortable with this kind of scene. The extremely serious voting atmosphere in the first two rounds was changed by Subai this time, and became a bit nondescript, not like who to choose. Death is more like choosing whoever becomes the village committee secretary. Whoever is elected will be promoted and make a fortune, so they all start canvassing for votes. Subai then put down the list, then looked around behind him in an exaggerated manner, then turned around without hesitation and ticked Chen Yuxin's name. Immediately afterwards, the list merged into the table and disappeared. It is estimated that the voting results will appear in just a minute. Subai became much quieter now, sitting silently on the chair with his hands on his knees. To be honest, when things came to pass, it was impossible for him to say that he could die calmly. If he simply changed places with those martyrs, Subai would feel better. At least he could sacrifice himself, and at least he could still have peace of mind when he died. The righteousness of a nation and a country is constantly recharging one's thoughts, but this way of death is a bit too oppressive and boring. Subconsciously, Subai reached out and touched the Hellfire shotgun on his waist. Subai was hesitating whether to try it at this time, but then gave up. He ate too much for breakfast and stopped doing strenuous exercise. Well, it's not good for the stomach. Moreover, you can't just walk to the middle of the conference room, raise your guns, and shout, "Die, die, die, die." To wipe out the whole group, you can only kill one person. It's not satisfying to relieve your anger. At this time, Subai didn't think about many things. The only thing he thought about was the little guy. He would have known that he should have divided and transferred his inheritance before entering this story world, just like his parents, who gave him before he left. He left a huge industry behind and arranged the system. Suddenly, Subai's eyes narrowed slightly. He seemed to have thought of something, but then he felt relieved. There was no point in thinking about those things now. Finally, voting records emerged. Subai waited for 3 seconds before reaching out to pick up the paper in front of him. He glanced at it, and then Subai slammed the table. Ha 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 ha. Something happened at home, and Long has to deal with it. The next chapter is expected to be written around 2 o'clock in the morning. Dear friends, please forgive me. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao Long. Chapter 189. Subai took 3 seconds to pick up the list and read it, so most of the audience read the list before Subai, that is, the voting results. Lu Tao was initially nonchalant. He felt that Subai had the highest number of votes. He just wanted to see how many votes Chen Yuxin would get this time. There should be 4 to 5 votes. It might even be higher, with 6 votes possible. People are selfish, and have an instinct to eliminate threats to their existence in advance. If the target of this vote is not the one with the highest number of votes, then the possibility of him continuing to vote for her next time is very high. Big, after all, he would feel that he had taken action against her. If she was not dead yet, then she might take revenge on him, although Chen Yuxin had no idea who had taken action against her. However, Lu Tao was shocked when he saw the voting results. Sudbai's vote count is very high, 8 votes, but there is another person who has even higher votes than Sudbai, that is Chen Xinyi. She has 9 votes. Damn it, Sudbai's votes were actually lower than Chen Xinyi's. How can this be? Lu Tao took a deep breath subconsciously and rubbed his chin with one hand. He thought he was seeing things, but he knew that this was impossible. Su Zhenxin's eyes widened. She couldn't believe that everything in front of her was true. Sudbai's votes did not exceed Chen Yuxin's. Why was that? In fact, Su Zhenxin also knows why this is, because there are too many smart people, but the fact gave them, including Su Zhenxin, a loud slap in the face. That is, sometimes having too many smart people is not a good thing, and everyone will have it. Everyone has their own long-term considerations, and when a group of people like this come together, the impact they have together can easily become being smart. Many people felt incredible about the voting results. Most people actually made a choice between Sudbai and Chen Yuxin. Only Qin Yang got 1 vote. I don't know why, but Qin Yang seemed to get the vote in every round. There is always a fixed vote. When Sudbai slapped the table and burst out laughing, the atmosphere in the conference room suddenly reached a stage of depression and collapse. A woman stood up. She is Chen Yuxin. Chen Yuxin's eyes at this time were filled with obvious anger. She did not get angry at Sudbai because she knew that Sudbai could not affect the situation by voting for her alone. It was those self-righteous guys who thought Sudbai was stable. The guys with the highest number of votes to die are the ones who start looking at the next nail before they can pull it out. Sudbai grabbed his hair with one hand, then turned around and looked at Chen Yuxin, who was sitting in the middle seat. He was looking forward to how the cutscene would play out. Well, that's how Chen Yuxin died. The rules of this story world are always pretty creative for that matter. A purple-red whip appeared in Chen Yuxin's hand. She wanted to vent, she wanted to hit someone, but when she took out the whip, she found that she could no longer control her body, and the whip began to fly on its own. And then began to beat her. It hurts, it hurts. After being beaten again and again, Chen Yuxin's body began to deform, and her bones and flesh began to slowly separate, but the whip continued. Soon, Chen Yuxin was beaten to death, but the whip continued to beat tirelessly. They are all skillfully used, and they are all borrowed skills. In the end, Chen Yuxin was still standing on the same spot, but only a skeleton was left. All the flesh and skin on her body separated at this time and fell to the ground. This method of death was more exciting than Qian Ian's previous method of death, and even gave Sudbai a vague sense of excitement. When the whip was struck again and again, Sudbai subconsciously waved his own. The hand is like a middle school boy imagining that he is controlling the whip. Some people couldn't stand the scene of beating corpses anymore, and started to leave the conference room. The third round of voting had ended, and with the addition of one more corpse, the smell of blood here became even stronger, which made people feel overwhelmed. There is no way to stay any longer. In the end, only Sudbai and another man were still sitting in the conference room, watching the whip continue to beat, slowly shaving off the remaining minced meat on Chen Yuxin's skeleton. There was still a little bit of soy milk, but it was already cold, but Sudbai didn't care. He picked it up and drank the last bit, then took out a cigarette and lit it. It seemed to be his own special treatment. After entering the world of this story, before Subai saw anyone else having cigarettes, he had one himself, and there was a pack of old-fashioned cigarettes in every coat in the wardrobe. Subai even wondered if this was his reward for completing the real task. After watching your hard work in helping solve real-life tasks, horror broadcast rewards you with the right to smoke freely in the story world. There was another guy who was as perverted as himself, enjoying the scene together. Subai knew the name of that man, it was Qin Yang. An ordinary-looking young man with an ordinary appearance, ordinary height, and ordinary temperament. A guy who makes no impression at all when you see him once and a second time. This kind of person is the most pitiful person in the workplace. He is completely ignored and dispensable. None roll. Brother, do you still have cigarettes? Qin Yang waved to Subai. Come on, I remember that Lu Tao also asked me for cigarettes last time, and now another one popped up. Subai really found it interesting. Can the cigarette benefits given to him by co-authoring a terrorist broadcast also be useful in diplomacy? Subai took out a few cigarettes and placed them on the table. Qin Yang came over, put a cigarette in his mouth, and clamped the other 2 cigarettes to his ears. Then he gently scraped the cigarette in his mouth and lit it. It's still going on. Qin Yang turned around and looked at Chen Yuxin, who was still being whipped over there. I estimate that when I see her tomorrow, her frame will be incredibly beautiful, pure, natural, and crystal clear, like the most exquisite work of art, Qin Yang began to describe. After hearing this, Subai suddenly felt like he was seeing people of the same kind. Perversion and mental illness often have great similarities in the world. Let's go, don't watch anymore, it's boring. Subai stood up and prepared to leave. What you did yesterday made me feel very happy, Qin Yang said behind Subai, that's why I deliberately voted for her instead of you today. Thank you, buddy. If you don't die this time, I'll treat you to a drink in the real world next time. Subai waved his hand and walked out of the conference room, while Qin Yang continued to stand in the conference room, looking at himself, the work of art about to take shape in front of you. There were several people eating in the restaurant. Maybe they just had a casual breakfast. Anyway, the buffet food in the restaurant was refreshed very quickly and was fresh and delicious, so you can come here anytime you want to eat. Subai was in a good mood, took a bottle of beer, blew a bottle into his dry mouth, put the bottle on the table, and walked back to the guest room without caring about the looks of those people looking at him. There was no one in the corridor next to the guest room. They were probably all in their own rooms. After this escapade from death, Subai felt that it would be a wonderful thing to seize the time and enjoy the next day, and his psychological pressure was also relieved. It has been relieved a lot, and it is estimated that the probability of having a mental illness again in a short time is not very high. Of course, the problem I have to face now is that this time it is obvious that several people think that they must be the highest vote, so they voted for Chen Yuxin 1 round in advance, allowing her to brush up her presence and lay the foundation for the next round, but next time in 1 round, those people will not be stupid, and will vote for themselves resolutely. The next round will be really bad, but whatever. Subai happened to reach the door of Chen Yuxin's room. His own room was a little further forward, but suddenly, Subai stopped in his tracks. The scene of Chen Yuxin being whipped to death appeared in Subai's mind. Then, Subai remembered the first time he saw, the first time he really came into contact with Chen Yuxin. In Zhao Zhen's room. At that time, Chen Yuxin was hiding in the closet. Unknowingly, Subai's mind began to wander. He seemed to have suddenly grasped something important, but he was still confused. However, after looking back and forth and finding that no one was there, Subai turned the doorknob of Chen Yuxin's room and walked in. Chen Yuxin's room is exactly the same as Zhao Zhen's. In fact, the specifications and layout of all guest rooms are the same. The difference is that the clothes in the wardrobe are very different. For example, Zhao Zhen is very short, so the clothes in his wardrobe are very different. The clothes are relatively small. Subai was not interested in looking at Chen Yuxin's bed, quilt, or other places, so he stood in front of her wardrobe first. Taking a deep breath, Subai looked at the wardrobe in front of him. He always felt that something would be discovered by him, but he seemed to be afraid of discovering this. Very conflicting emotions. However, there is no reason not to open it, right? Subai stretched out his hand and opened the closet door. There were a lot of clothes hanging inside, both men's and women's. This was not surprising, because Subai also had several women's clothes in his closet. I guess the story rules it can be regarded as taking care of some people's hobbies. However, the clothes in Chen Yuxin's wardrobe seemed to be of different sizes. The sizes of some clothes were obviously too big, and the sizes of some clothes were obviously too small. Subai frowned and turned over them one by one, wondering if they were women's clothes. A flavor? However, when Subai took out a piece of clothing that Chen Yuxin wore on the first day in his memory, his arm touched the wardrobe plywood and shook. Then, under Subai's gaze, a piece of human skin was shaken out from the clothes and fell at Subai's feet. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 190. Subai picked up the human skin and squeezed it in his hand. The human skin was very soft, smooth, and delicate. It felt really good, much better than an inflatable doll. However, when Subai turned the face of the human skin, when I came over, I found that the face was completely torn, so completely that nothing could be seen at all. Frowning slightly, Subai put the human skin in front of his nose and smelled it. There was no special smell, only a faint smell of sweat. Subai's nose was not that of a dog, and he couldn't tell whether it was a man's sweat or a woman's. The smell of sweat. Next, Subai spread the human skin completely and spread it on the bed. Subai originally wanted to see whether this was a man or a woman through the body shape, but the important parts of the body were actually destroyed, and the human skin also obviously lost the tension it had before. With a little force, it started to work on its own. Torn. It's a scrap that doesn't have much clue value. But, what does this human skin mean? Is this something that belongs to Chen Yuxin or someone else? What can this human skin be used for? Can you become another person? After all, the door of this room cannot be locked and anyone can enter or exit it. If you just preconceptually think that this is Chen Yuxin's thing, you will easily go astray. But, what does this piece of human skin mean, and why is it in Chen Yuxin's room? Subai hung up the clothes and put away the human skin, then opened the door of Chen Yuxin's room. After making sure that no one was around, he walked out and entered his room. There was no TV or Wi-Fi in the guest room. It was actually very boring. Subai was lying on the bed with the human skin next to him. He was thinking about these things in his mind, but who knew that he would feel dizzy just thinking about it? I fell asleep, like taking a nap. When Subai woke up, he looked at the wall clock. He had already slept for an hour. Occasionally, it was very pleasant to take a nap during the day. However, Subai knew that he would not be able to sleep for long that day. According to the rules of this world, it will definitely arrange another scene today. Of course, now Subai really hopes that it can arrange a scene, because it means that Subai has a chance to turn around, and this scene must be as tense and exciting as possible. Otherwise, once the day passes safely, Subai will still be the best candidate tomorrow. A smart person will not try to be smart about one thing for the second time, otherwise he is not smart but stupid. Just when Subai was about to go to the restaurant to have something to eat, the wind suddenly blew around him. Then, the scene changed. What appeared in front of Subai was no longer the door, but a cave. The cave extends in all directions. Where Subai was standing, there were nearly 8 passages in the front, back, left, and right. It seemed to be a random way for the audience to choose which way to go. There was a rock wall above their heads, but there seemed to be a little light on the surrounding rocks. It was not very bright, but it could make people feel. People feel that they can barely see the surrounding environment clearly, and it feels gray. It's not a desert or the sea after all. Subai murmured to himself, indeed, the previous two scenes were too torturous. Of course, this time it is probably also the rules of this story world to prevent the audience from being unable to support themselves, so they chose such a relatively gentle scene. Although this is a cave, and the light is relatively dim, but at least there is no need to be exposed to the wind and Sunday. Those people either have lingering poisons or burns that have not healed, and they really cannot withstand such a cruel environment for the time being. Subai did not rush to try his luck and choose a cave and walk in. Instead, he took out a box of matches from his pocket, lit a match and placed it hole by hole to watch the flames sway. Sure enough, only one of the caves showed wind passing through, and the flames were clearly deflected. Subai dropped the match on the ground and walked into the cave. It's not easy to walk in the cave, it's uneven and you have to climb over big rocks in some places. Although it was a bit of a hassle, fortunately there was no danger until a light appeared in front of him. To be precise, it was a light door. Subai stretched out his hand and was sucked into the light door. Then he found that he was still standing in the guest room. Inside. WTF? Subai was a little at a loss. What do you mean? Is this scene just over? Subai felt deeply speechless. If this scene just passed by and he didn't even meet any other audience members, how could he distinguish it? Could it be that due to the rules of this story world, I thought it would be better to die myself, so I designed such a simple scene to fool the mission, which is equivalent to asking other listeners to take a walk after dinner, and then they will do what they should do. Let's put the guy who was supposed to die last time to death. Now, Subai could only think of this explanation in his mind. Just when I needed a scene with a high degree of distinction and excitement, a scene like this appeared as a joke, which really went too far. Subai can go to bed now, and then wait for the execution the next morning when he votes. Of course, if Subai feels bored, he can also dream about how he will be used when he is voted the most and dies. Every time he watches others die, he has a new idea of the rules of this story world. A sense of identity and excitement, and I always feel that this way of killing is in line with the aesthetics of killing. Okay, now it's almost my turn, and I can experience it myself. Subai walked into the bathroom, rinsed his face, then looked at himself in the mirror, rubbed his face with his hands, and smiled. Now I hope you are sick, you are sick, you are sick. Well, now you are not sick anymore, damn it. After talking to himself for a while, Subai opened the guest room door. There was no one in the corridor, and Subai didn't take it seriously. When he walked into the restaurant, there was still no one. Until Subai took some snacks and drinks from the tray and prepared to sit down, there was still no one there. The surroundings were so quiet that it felt a bit cold. Subai suddenly threw the dinner plate on the table, then rushed out of the restaurant, went to the guest room first, and opened the doors one by one. No one. No one. No one. No one. No one. Still no one. What does this mean? Subai touched his hair and took a deep breath. Could it be that the others were still spinning around in the cave scene without coming out, and he just came out so simply? Now, am I the only one in this hotel? There was another place that was not checked. Subai immediately ran back to the restaurant, then passed through the restaurant and came to the door of the conference room. The door of the conference room always closed automatically, and usually had to be pushed by hand to open. At this time, the sound of whips was still coming from the conference room. It was obvious that this kind of artwork had not been completely processed. Qin Yang said that Chen Yuxin's body would probably have to wait until the next day's voting meeting to be completely carved. By then, the entire skeleton would be as beautiful and flawless as jade. It seems that Qin Yang's previous perverted works of art were not available. If you don't do it less, he should be a very heavy-tongued guy in the real world. In fact, most perverts in the real world have very ordinary looks and very ordinary personalities. For example, some serial murderers always feel that they are in front of their friends and neighbors. It is very common that until the incident is revealed, those who have lived with him for many years will feel numb and incredible at the same time. Subai was originally looking forward to this work of art, but for some reason, in the empty environment of the hotel where he seemed to be alone, he suddenly heard the sound of a whip coming from the conference room. It always gives people an unusually ghastly feeling, as if the whip is like the pendulum of a wall clock, constantly beating on oneself, constantly reminding oneself of the time when the door of hell closes, and constantly giving oneself life. Counting down. Yes, I really didn't think this place was so dark or scary before, because at that time there were many people around me, whether they wanted me to die or had their own agenda, but at least there were many people around me. People, so even retro guest rooms, cafeterias that automatically refresh food, depressing conference rooms and other environments no longer seem so scary. Just like a person entering a haunted house will feel very scary, but what if there are hundreds of people together? A group of people are crowded in the passage of the haunted house, so there is probably nothing to be afraid of. Subai stopped at the door of the conference room inexplicably. For some reason, he vaguely felt that if he went to the conference room now, he would find something unexpected. Squatting down, Subai took out the cigarettes and lit them one by one. Now it can be seen that perhaps this opportunity is the benefit of the horror broadcast for him to complete the real task. Others are still in the scene and have not come out. But I have already come out, in this place where I am alone. Perhaps. Should. Possible. Perhaps. I can see and discover some things outside of the voting game. This story world cannot be that simple, nor can it be that pure. Keep voting, keep pretending to be a coward, once or twice is okay, but continuing like this is not consistent. The aesthetic of horror broadcasting. After smoking 3 cigarettes in a row, Subai gritted his teeth and stood up. He didn't know where his sudden fear came from. Was it an instinctive prediction? Walking forward, he placed his palm on the door of the conference room, and then the door was slowly pushed open by Subai. Suddenly. Looking at the scene inside. Subai was stunned. There was a look of disbelief on his face. This. What is? The next chapter should be before 12 o'clock. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 191. In the conference room, there was a person at this time, who was whipping Chen Yuxin's skeleton with a leather whip. He looked resentful and unwilling, as if he wanted to vent all his anger on this skeleton. Above, he, is Zhao Zhen. On the other side, Qian Lan was holding a rope and kept tightening Zhao Zhen's neck back and forth. Zhao Zhen's neck was broken by her again and again, and then his head returned to the original position again and again, and continued to be beaten by Qian. Lan was strangled hard. Next to Qian Ian's body, Chen Yuxin was holding a saw and sawing Qian Ian's body. Zhao Zhen holding the whip, Qian Lan holding the rope, and Chen Yuxin holding the saw. They are all translucent gray. Obviously, they are not real existences, like a dead soul with resentment, venting its anger. Because of his unwillingness to die, it may even have a lot to do with the layout of this conference room. After death, the soul of the dead cannot be reincarnated or dissipate, and is imprisoned here. This means that even if the mission of this story world is over, as long as the terrorist broadcast does not disappear or destroy it, the listeners who died here will suffer from this torture forever. Not allowed to transcend, not allowed to leave, constantly wandering in resentment and unwillingness. None of these 3 people seem to have seen Subai's arrival. Or, Subai and them are already in different planes. They are ghosts and Subai is a human. Subai continued to walk in. He sat in the first row, looked at these 3 people, and continued to do one thing tirelessly like crazy. Immediately afterwards, Subai suddenly found something raised on the table. Subai put his palm over it, and then his whole hand sank into it, just like the scene before when the list of names disappeared and reappeared. Immediately, Subai seemed to have grabbed something and pulled it out hard. There was a strong stickiness on the palm, so Subai pulled hard for a long time before finally pulling the thing out. It's actually a tablet. There are 2 words on the tablet, Subai. Subai threw the tablet on the table, and the tablet naturally reintegrated into the table. Then, Subai stood up and sat in another position. He put his hand on the protruding object and dug his palm into it again. He touched another thing and continued to pull it out. It was still a tablet. The name above is actually my own. Subai remembered that when voting before, there was no such protruding thing on the table in the conference room, and it was impossible for the audience's hands to integrate into the desk to pick things out. Suddenly, Subai had the illusion that he was entering the backstage of a game, or behind the stage. The audience buys tickets to enter, and until they sit down in their seats, what they see and present is often the most carefully prepared scene. After going backstage, there is often a feeling that the beauty is broken, just like in a movie. Movies usually show a few teasers after watching the movie to make the audience happy. If the teasers and interlude shots are shown at the beginning, the viewing experience will be reduced too much, and there may even be no sense of immersion at all. At this time, Subai was in the background of the voting game. Although I don't know why I reached down from each table and took out tablets with my name engraved on them. Could it be that I will definitely die tomorrow? So the rules of the story world have already prepared their own tablets in advance. Subai searched, looked again, and finally sat down in his old seat in the last row. At this time, Lu Tao was not here, so there was no one to compete with Subai for the position. However, not long after Subai sat down, there was a sound of footsteps outside, and the corpses and the 3 dead souls also disappeared in an instant. Subai was stunned. Those people have come back. But when you come back, according to previous experience, you should eat or go back to the guest room to rest, and you shouldn't go straight to the conference room. Subai was still sitting in his original position, not moving. The door of the conference room was pushed open, and Subai saw strange faces walking in. Yes, the completely strange faces were living people, but Subai simply don't know them. Never seen it? Really never seen it? These people, both men and women, all had a look of fear and uneasiness on their faces. A few of them seemed relatively calm, but they were all low-key. Everyone who came in sat down according to their previous positions. Subai still sat in his original position. Beside him, a woman also sat down. The woman looked at Subai and smiled. Subai also smiled. Your arm, the woman seemed to have discovered something suddenly. Was it injured before entering the terror broadcast? Subai was a little stunned. He could understand what this woman meant, that is, every time terror broadcast selected someone to enter the story world, it would help him recover from his injuries. But if someone had lost an arm or leg before encountering terror broadcast, then terror broadcast won't be superfluous to help you grow your legs and hands back. Subai nodded, but said nothing. Seeing Subai's cold look, the woman seemed to realize that she was being a little abrupt. She also lowered her head and put her hands on the desk to keep entangled, and stopped talking. At this moment, the door was pushed open again, and 2 people finally walked in, a man and a woman. Subai didn't take it seriously at first, but when he glanced over, his whole body felt like an electric shock. Suner. Chu Zhao. Yes, these 2 people are Suner and Chu Zhao. How come they are here? How could they be here? Chu Zhao and Suner were also looking for a place after they came in. Of course, they were also observing other people around them while looking for a place. Subai lowered his head subconsciously, leaving his back outside and facing inward. In fact, Subai had already made a calculation in his heart. Damn it, in this story world, not only his group of people were the only ones, there were also a group of people who had joined now. When another group of people entered the scene, another group of people were carrying out activities here. The two sides would not meet unless something unexpected happened. Subai was considered a special case this time. It may be the same as the last real-life mission completed, related to subsequent welfare. However, Suner and Chu Zhao actually came in and entered the terror broadcast. This was something Subai never expected. Suner's eyes lingered on Subai for a while, but after realizing that Subai was one-armed, he moved away. Obviously, that person was not one-armed. Chu Zhao and Suner sat down together in a seat in the middle. Seeing this scene, Subai felt an inexplicable toothache. The two people knew each other so clearly that they would be targeted by others, and they might die in the first round of voting. Wait. Subai began to count the number of people subconsciously. If he was not counted, there were 17 more people here, exactly the same as the number of people on his side. Obviously, the voting of this group of people was no longer the first round. This time it should be the fourth round. If the voting continues until the fourth round and Chu Zhao and Suner are not familiar with the rules of this kind of voting, Subai will definitely not believe it. Chu Zhao is at least a criminal police officer, and Suner is also a military attaché stationed abroad. Both of them can be considered people who have experienced the market, and they are definitely not that unbearable and naive. They are walking together openly now, and it is obvious that they have deep-seated reasons. However, Subai couldn't figure out one more thing. Was he trespassing now? From the circle that originally belonged to me, I suddenly jumped out and entered another circle. But you have to vote later. How should you vote? Also, since the voting has reached the fourth round, they should be familiar with each other, and they shouldn't feel weird when they mix in with themselves as an outsider. For example, the woman sitting next to him actually greeted him just now, but didn't realize that she had never seen him before. Could it be said that the rules of the game are to allow people in two game circles who have the opportunity to intersperse in the game to have the ability to be recognized by the other circle instinctively? It's like imposing an unsolvable bug. It's obviously the first time you've met him, you've never communicated with him before, and you've never seen his photo in the previous voting list, but when he suddenly appears in front of you sometimes, you feel as if he has always been involved in this game, has always been in it, and has never changed. Horror broadcasting definitely has this capability. Subai suddenly remembered that after Lychee wiped out a city, the whole world had forgotten that city under the influence of the terrorist broadcast. This was actually a similar story. Soon, the list appeared. To Subai's surprise, a voting list and a pen appeared in front of him. After being cautious at the beginning, Subai now began to look at the 17 people on the list more generously. He was not on this list. Suner and Chu Zhao were naturally inside, so it was naturally impossible for Subai to vote for them. He could just vote for someone else. Subai checked the pen under a man's photo, but found that the pen was out of oil. Grass. It shouldn't be. Subai turned over the voting list with a smile, and suddenly found that there was a photo on the back. It was his own, and it was Subai. Subai pursed his lips and used the pen to draw a tick below. Look. Drawn. At this time, Subai suddenly thought of someone. A guy who is always one vote in his own circle. No matter how the situation changes, he is always one vote, always. Subai started to grab his head with both hands. Damn. My own perception must have been changed by the horror broadcast because someone from the opposite voting game circle came in. Subai suddenly turned over the voting list again. He was staring at the photos of these 17 people. Except for Suner and Chu Zhao, he didn't know anyone. But when Subai's eyes widened with bloodshot eyes, The man in the photo slowly changed. Really? You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 192. The man's head in the photo began to become blurry and distorted, and in the end, it slowly began to look like another person. Qin Yang. It is indeed Qin Yang. Sudbai's throat was a little dry and his eyes began to feel dull. When the voting list on the table melted into the table, Sudbai slowly closed his eyes. What's wrong with you? The woman next to him asked in surprise. This woman is so annoying. You are so warm-hearted, so attentive, and so caring. Why didn't you die in the first few rounds? Sudbai waved his hand to indicate that he was fine. It's just that my head and eyes really hurt a lot. Then, when Sudbai reached out and touched his face, he actually touched a layer of red viscous substance, which was blood. It was blood. Sudbai was stunned. He suddenly felt that this was too exaggerated. Could it be that this was the price of seeing through the impact of the rules of the game on him? At this moment, when Sudbai was reaching out to wipe the blood on his face, the surroundings suddenly became extremely quiet. He looked around with eyes filled with scarlet vision. Sudbai found that there was only one person in the conference room. I was left alone. Is it over? Have you returned from that gaming circle to your original gaming circle? Sudbai shook his head. His head was still a little groggy. He stumbled out of the conference room. When he entered the restaurant, he found that there were already several people in the restaurant, including Su Zhenzhen. They didn't seem to be very curious about Sudbai's current appearance. After all, there were many traces of injuries and bleeding on their bodies. Obviously, unlike Sudbai who walked out of the scene for a while and then came out quickly, they should have also encountered it. Some trouble. Taking a bottle of water, Sudbai flushed his face to wash away the blood stains, and then breathed a long sigh of relief, but there was also a deep feeling of powerlessness in his heart. He knew that some others did not. I know something, but can I avoid the vote tomorrow morning? Sudbai sat down on a chair. He didn't take anything to eat. He just sat quietly like this, with various thoughts and conjectures constantly colliding in his mind. He suddenly thought about the human skin found in Chen Yuxin's room. Then I thought of Qin Yang, who kept popping up in this game circle just like me before. There were many clues, but he didn't know the beginning or the end, which made Sudbai's head grow bigger. There were more and more people, and most of them should have left the scene. However, when Sudbai gradually broke away from his previous emotions, he keenly noticed that something was wrong with the expressions of these people. It was not as relaxed and joyful as when he came out of the scene, and he seemed much quieter when eating and drinking. Sudbai was a little confused, but didn't know who to ask because he didn't seem to have a very good relationship with the people here. Silently, Sudbai walked to the table of Su Zhenzhen and Lu Tao. They were not sitting together, but they were relatively close. Sudbai sat next to them and asked directly. What's wrong? Well, the relationship was already very bad anyway, and Sudbai didn't care whether they wanted to talk to him or not. In fact, Sudbai even turned cold, showing a kind of if you don't tell me, I'll die with you, so you were playing with Chen Yuxin. A drama of hurting each other. Su Zhenzhen snorted coldly, but still spoke. Someone is dead. Lu Tao looked at Sudbai with a puzzled expression. Sudbai, why didn't I see you in the previous scenes? Sudbai reached out, picked up the uneaten milk that was placed in front of Su Zhenzhen, and took a sip. Because I went to a special place. Sudbai didn't intend to hide it, because there was no need to hide it. Of course, more importantly, to be honest, it didn't seem to have much effect. Based on their conventional thinking, Su Zhenzhen and Lu Tao believed that Sudbai had his own opportunities or gains in that scene, but they didn't show much envy on their faces. "Qin Yang, he's dead," Lu Tao said. "Qin Yang? Died?" In the depths of Sudbai's pupils, a flash of surprise flashed away. "Yes, dead, killed by a rolling stone, right in front of us, dead." Su Zhenzhen spread her hands. "Do you believe it? He died so inexplicably. He was hit in the head by a stone, and his brains splattered directly, and he died." Sudbai was silent. He suddenly understood why everyone was less interested after leaving the scene this time. He probably thought that in the scene, no matter how dangerous or what happened, the horror broadcast would be stable in the end. He brought everyone back here. He couldn't die in the scene. If he died, he would die in the conference room. However, Qin Yang died in full view of the public, died in this scene, and was still smashed to death by an ordinary stone. This obviously subverted the concept of these audiences, that is, death, in it will also appear in the scene. If Qian Lan didn't use his ability to speed up everyone swimming in the first scene, then maybe someone might really die there. In the second scene, if Sudbai didn't hesitate to use the gun, everyone's restraints are broken, and someone may die in the scene due to poisoning or injuries. It seems that death is no longer the exclusive power of voting. Su Zhenzhen looked at Sudbai and didn't care that Sudbai drank her milk. She put a donut into her mouth, took out a piece of tissue and wiped her hands, then stood up and left. Lu Tao pinched Sudbai. This time Sudbai did not humiliate Lu Tao like last time, but gave him 2 cigarettes, and then lit a cigarette himself and started smoking. 2 men sat together, blowing smoke rings at each other. Afterwards, Lu Tao threw the cigarette butt on the ground, stamped on it with his feet, and left the restaurant. After Su Zhenzhen and Lu Tao both left, Sudbai's eyes narrowed slightly. "Qin Yang. Did he really die in the scene? Being smashed to death by a stone in the sight of everyone except himself?" Sudbai didn't believe that the pervert who could watch Chen Yuxin being whipped bit by bit into a work of art that rivaled his own taste would actually die like this in the scene. Suddenly, Sudbai recalled the list he had seen in another gaming circle before. Qin Yang was on the list, but Qin Yang didn't seem to look like what he saw. Damn it, what does it mean? What is the pattern? Qin Yang's death was so strange. No, Sudbai took a deep breath, as if he was yawning, but his eyes suddenly sank. Qin Yang shouldn't have died in the scene. He should have been killed in another game. The vote was dead, so his identity in this game was removed with a reasonable excuse. Sudbai recalled the first time he experienced the task. The female white-collar worker was clearly stabbed to death by himself, but when the police investigated, they found that she had suffered a heart attack. These are all horror broadcast routines. But how is the number of people calculated? There are 20 people over there and 20 people over here. If a person, such as myself, suddenly goes there and then here suddenly, won't the number of people fluctuate? Regarding the number of people, how are the rules of this game designed? Sudbai has played this kind of killing game before. Of course, it's not really killing people in the killing club, but it's similar to the werewolf game or please close your eyes when it's dark. There are some hidden professions in it that can be used after dark. Go out and do something. The reason why I was able to suddenly move around in another gaming circle must be because for some unknown reason, this benefit fell on me. Or is the person who previously had this benefit died? So this benefit or hidden career randomly fell on me. For example, Chen Yuxin? Sudbai suddenly remembered the human skin found in Chen Yuxin's room. What was the function of that human skin? Also, a very important point, which is what Sudbai attaches most importance to, is that Qin Yang is dead. One person has died this time. So will tomorrow's voting continue? If the voting continues tomorrow, Sudbai will still be in the most dangerous situation, just like Chen Yuxin. Sudbai suddenly thought of the human skin, and his intuition told Subai that if the last person who could travel between two game circles was Chen Yuxin, then that human skin would definitely have a special function. After getting a bottle of wine, Subai also walked back to his room. Several people were talking in the corridor. After getting along with each other for a while, and what happened today, it is estimated that there are indeed several people. They are their own small teams. Although you can't see it on the surface, and of course, you won't be able to see it on the surface, the tacit understanding and feeling are still unmistakable. They saw Subai coming and stopped communicating. One of the men with longer hair reached out to Subai for a cigarette. Subai gave him the half-pack left in his pocket. He smiled and said it was really interesting. Subai didn't bother to reply, "Don't vote for yourself if you really mean it. Everyone here is good at wearing a mask of hypocrisy." Moreover, Subai had seen clearly before that the three people standing together and talking were obviously intentional. There was a look of reluctance on the man's face, and he felt like he was on the verge of death, but these were not things that Subai needed to worry about. He was not that free, although he actually had nothing to do. After returning to the room and lying on the bed, Subai opened the wine bottle and drank several sips. Slowly, sleepiness came over him. Subai did not stop the sleepiness, nor did he hold it back. He could sleep a little longer and feel more comfortable. It is also a kind of enjoyment. When he was sleeping, Subai felt a little itchy on his body, but he didn't take it seriously for a while. When he woke up from his short nap, Subai suddenly found that he had a sticky feeling on his body. He reached out and touched himself. Skin. A layer of old human skin. It was actually torn off by Subai like this. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 193. That's disgusting. Subai started tearing at the shed skin on his body in disgust. What surprised Subai was that the new skin was still his original skin, but this shed skin did not look like Subai's original skin. After tearing off the tangerine peel, Subai found that the head and other parts of the human skin were badly worn. It was exactly the same as the human skin he found in Chen Yuxin's room. It seemed that this was not deliberately damaged by anyone later. After all, this is also the result of Subai's own personal practice and proof. In this way, it is almost certain that the previous one should be Chen Yuxin's own skin. It is impossible for Chen Yuxin to steal it from other rooms. The probability is a bit too low. Of course, it is not impossible, but if this possibility is not, if you have to consider it, it's a bit too expensive. Chen Yuxin was the last person to be able to travel back and forth between the two gaming circles, but because of Subai, she was immediately game over. Subai couldn't help but feel a little sad, thinking that Chen Yuxin was clearly the person who stood tallest and could see the farthest before, but she was tricked to death because of her mental illness. But, what should I do if I take this thing now? What can this hidden power bring to you? Just a bit of sightseeing? Or does it mean something special? Qin Yang votes for himself every time. Why? What signal do you want to send? Do you want to tell the same professionals in the gaming circle here that he comes from another gaming circle? After all, according to Subai's previous personal experience, if he went to that gaming circle, his name and photo would not be on the voting list, and he could vote for himself. The relationship between the number of votes and the number of people must be because one person in each of the two game circles can travel back and forth, which increases the calculation difficulty. But how does the horror broadcast solve this dynamic change? Is it possible that it has been making adjustments and calculations? Or even, constantly refreshing the consciousness and memory in the minds of all the listeners like refreshing food in a restaurant? This is not in line with the behavioral habits of horror broadcasting. What it likes is to personally create a story world that makes it feel satisfied and complacent, build a stage, and then let the audience come in and constantly struggle and tease, while satisfying itself. Enjoy the satisfaction of predicting and calculating everything in advance. It's unlikely that horror broadcast would always directly intervene in this situation, otherwise it wouldn't fit with its aesthetic. This means that as the number of people continues to change dynamically, terrorist broadcasts have always had a backdoor, or a plan, to smooth out the trends and changes in the number of people. This backdoor may be the secret to the entire story world. Damn it, how did you do it? If you go there, it's like there is one more person. The number of votes will be different, and the number of listeners will be different, even if you are an inconspicuous guy like Qin Yang, even if no one else notices this guy, he still occupies one person's head. Subai picked up the unfinished wine on the bedside table and took a big gulp. The stimulation of alcohol did not make Subai's mind clearer, but made him more impatient. He simply walked into the bathroom and took a cold shower. Later, when Subai walked out of the bathroom, he saw that his face, hands, and everything about him on the mirror seemed to have changed greatly. Wrong. Did I go in again? Subai couldn't believe it. Isn't there any regularity in the connection between the two games? Can't control it yourself? At this time, in the mirror, Subai's original appearance was no longer there, but the appearance of another person, a young man with an ordinary appearance, ordinary hairstyle, and ordinary everything else. Subai came to his bedside. The quilt was folded neatly and the sheets were pulled very straight. There was no trace of anyone lying on it just now. At the same time, the bottle of wine on the bedside table was gone. Suddenly, Subai felt some sympathy for Chen Yuxin. If Chen Yuxin was like this back then, constantly shuttling between the two game circles, trying to scheming while trying to test things out, for other listeners it would be enough to pretend to be cowardly and inconspicuous, but for Chen Yuxin, she had to keep investigating something, and in the end, she actually encountered Subai, a mentally ill person. While Subai was still immersed in his previous thoughts, there was a knock on the door. "Hello, can I come in?" Subai was a little shocked. Someone was looking for him just after he came to this gaming circle? Could it be said that it only appears when there is a role? Subai walked over and opened the door, and it turned out to be the woman sitting next to him before. The woman must have just taken a shower, and her hair was still wet, but she was relatively thin, and she still looked like I felt pity for her. The woman walked in and sat down directly beside Subai's bed. Subai frowned slightly. What was she going to do? "I'm scared and empty." The woman held her arms with both hands and began to sob as she spoke. At the same time, her vagina that could not be covered by her pajamas was revealed, showing a strange amorous look. Subai suddenly understood and finally understood. "Can you hug me?" the woman said to Subai. Can you stop talking? Just hug me? I don't ask you for anything, and I don't expect anything from you. I just want to be comforted." What a literary and artistic way to send out guns. Subai sighed in her heart. In fact, there was nothing to despise. She was willing to use her body to win the favor of some men one by one at this time, so as to reduce the possibility of being selected in the voting. A way to invest and protect yourself. However, Subai had no intention of doing such a thing now. He pointed directly at his broken arm. "I'm missing an arm. I don't mind, really. I'm gay. I'm sorry, but your behavior makes me very disgusted," Subai said in an attitude that summoned up all the courage. The woman immediately stood up anxiously, said sorry to Subai repeatedly, and then opened the door and left Subai's room. Perhaps, she was specifically looking for a man with the least presence like Subai to use her body to have a good time with her. Sensitive, so when she found out that Subai was gay, she was still afraid that her behavior would make Subai feel disgusted. Then she would really be shooting herself in the foot. Subai touched his nose, feeling a little helpless about this scene. When he walked over to close the door, he saw Chu Zhao holding a dinner plate walking past his door. Chu Zhao saw the door open. Looking at Subai, who was standing in the door, he stopped. Haha, you are quite capable. You have been living in seclusion. In fact, there is no need to pretend to be so. Of course, Subai knew what Chu Zhao meant, and he just nodded. To be honest, Chu Zhao didn't know himself now. Subai hadn't decided yet whether to get in touch with the people here. After all, he and the relationship between Chu Zhao and Suner is unusual. I brought some extra cantaloupe, do you want to eat it? Chu Zhao raised a piece of melon and handed it to Subai. Subai reached out to take it, and then decided to open his mouth and said, Chu Zhao, I am Subai. Haha, I know your name is Kuman. Your name and photo are on the list. Chu Zhao walked away with a smile. Subai froze on the spot. Suddenly, a great fear ran through his body, and his whole body suddenly became cold. An invisible barrier is covering him, allowing him to come here, but he can only be a bystander. He cannot reveal his identity because there is a force that does not allow him to do so. But what should you do if you don't? As the game continues, more and more people die. Damn it, what is this voting game going to do? Subai closed the door and took a bite of the melon. It was a bit sour and tasted very bad. This Chu Zhao, Subai cursed and threw the remaining melon on the ground. He sat on the edge of the bed and reached out to touch his pocket as usual, only to find that he had no cigarettes. Perhaps, under this identity model, he had no cigarettes. If he wanted to smoke, he had to wait until he returned to his original home. In the game circle, Subai lay on the bed with his hands open. In his mind, he couldn't help but start to picture Chen Yuxin and Qin Yang. These two people should be the same as him before. Chen Yuxin probably doesn't have any special meaning. After all, she must always be careful about the people in her own gaming circle, but Qin Yang doesn't have this worry. She may be very careful about the people in her own gaming circle, but for another game people in the circle may not be so careful because the other circle cannot vote them to death. Brother, do you still have cigarettes? It's still going on. I estimate that when I see her tomorrow, her frame will be incredibly beautiful, pure, natural, and crystal clear, like the most exquisite work of art. What you did yesterday made me feel very happy, so I deliberately voted for her instead of you today. Recalling the few contacts he had with Qin Yang, every word Qin Yang said echoed in Subai's mind several times. Suddenly, Subai suddenly realized that something was wrong with the last sentence. What you did yesterday made me feel very happy, so I deliberately voted for her instead of you today. Qin Yang cannot vote for Chen Yuxin, he has always voted for himself. In that vote, Qin Yang still had one vote, and he voted by himself, because others didn't realize that they couldn't vote for Qin Yang even if they wanted to. But what did he mean by this? He also wants to kill Chen Yuxin. Why? People in two gaming circles hurt each other? Subai rushed out of his room. Chu Zhao was still standing next to a trash can in the corridor eating fruit. Except for the piece for Subai, all the melons were thrown into the trash can. Subai rushed to Chu Zhao and asked directly. Who received the highest number of votes in the last round of voting? Shuya, what's wrong? Female. Yeah, are you okay, brother? I was drunk too. A person like you can still live until now. I really envy you now. You don't even need to pretend. It's all natural. Ignoring Chu Zhao's teasing, Subai turned around blankly. He finally understood. Understand the real gameplay of this game. Qin Yang. Not dead. He just completed his mission successfully and left this story world. Also, regarding the dynamic changes in the number of people in this game, about Zhao Zhen's death, about Jian Yian's death, and about the reason why Chu Zhao and Suner didn't die even though they obviously had an attitude of knowing each other. Subai also knew it. Turn out to be. That's it. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiao Long. Chapter 194. Chu Zhao saw Subai return to the room chattering away, his eyes showed a hint of suspicion, and then he smiled. It's interesting to pretend to be a coward and a lunatic. After returning to the room, Subai sat on a chair and began to empty his mind. Based on the clues he had received before, Subai had now figured out the specific aspects of this voting game. The voting game is still a voting game. It is divided into 2 game circles. Each circle is composed of 10 men and 10 women. But according to what the host of the horror broadcast said at the beginning of this story world, 20 young people, all between 20 and 30 years old, 10 men and 10 women, pretty average, right? At this time, they were all lying on their beds and getting ready to sleep, but suddenly they found that their bedroom had changed. A bloody game of order and choice. It's kicked off. The 20 young people were mentioned by the horror radio host. Do these 20 young people really just refer to a gaming circle? No. It should be referring to 2 gaming circles. It is impossible for there to be deception from the beginning. If even the host of the horror broadcast said it at the beginning and the information he gave at the beginning was a hoax, then it would bring down the B rating of the horror broadcast too much. Then, do a reverse reasoning and first implement the horror broadcast's statement that 10 men and 10 women are absolutely correct. Then, the meaning is that no matter how many game circles there are still 20 people in total. Now there are 2 game circles, with 20 people on each side, adding up to 40 people. According to the previous inference, it means that only half of these 40 people are real listeners. And there are still half, which is 20 people. Yes. Ghost. This kind of ghost is not the ghost that a person becomes after death in the ordinary sense, but more similar to a computer player in a game battle. For example, a battle game requires 5v5, but there are only 4 players. In the end, there are 2 real players on each side and 3 game players on each side. Here, the same method should be used for the story world rules. There are only 20 people in the audience, and it is divided into 2 game circles. The real players are actually equivalent to 2 people who can travel back and forth between the 2 sides of the game circle each time. Then, this will cause a huge waste. When the rest of the audience, or the rest of the players, do not have that qualification, can it be said that they can only die endlessly without limit? This is obviously impossible. If this is the case, the fun and unfair principles of the game will be completely broken. Therefore, the rules of this story world also create ghosts, which are equivalent to computer players who accompany the prince to study. They don't know that they are computer players, they don't know that they are fake, and they don't know that they are ghosts. They regard themselves as real listeners and think that they are also part of the story, and they also have the desire and impulse to survive. However, because they were created by the story rules of this story world, their final right of interpretation belongs to the rules of this story world. Some of their behaviors, some of their meaning of existence, and even whether they exist or not, are all subject to the rules of this story world. The rules of the story can be changed, modified, and adapted according to their own needs, but they can't help themselves at all, and they have no idea at all. Subai has been struggling with a problem before, that is, if people can travel back and forth between the 2 game circles, how to count the heads, the number of voters, voting rules, etc. Many places will have many loopholes and loopholes due to changes in personnel. Bug, but now it seems that horror broadcasting has actually solved this kind of loopholes and bugs a long time ago. The method is very simple. You must know that in the game circles on both sides, each side has 10 ghosts of horror broadcasting. In terms of the number of people, voting rules, and other aspects, it is really a simple matter to make your own backdoor arrangements. For example, when Subai entered this game circle, a certain ghost disappeared directly. It just so happens that the total number of people and votes remains unchanged, right? In this way, this kind of logical problem can be perfectly solved. Of course, The rules of this story world have another biggest weapon, that is, the people who shuttle back and forth. For people who don't know him, they feel that he is always there, but it's just very rare. Just low-key. With this terrifying ability to modify people's perception of things, and with 20 ghosts helping him solve the inherent loopholes in his logic, only this complex voting game can truly run perfectly. Only horror broadcasters can organize such a game. Subai silently rubbed his eyebrows. To be honest, he felt that this kind of game was very depressing. It didn't have the atmosphere of a game at all. Instead, it brought out intrigues on many levels. The two people in each circle who can travel freely have much greater pressure than ordinary listeners. They are equivalent to people elected by the two game circles and forced to the dual field. The one who wins is the winner. Mission: return to the real world, the dead will fall here forever, accompanying the undead. Qin Yang was recommended by that gaming circle. After he came to Subai's gaming circle, he had been observing and searching for someone who had the same ability to travel back and forth between the two gaming circles. Of course he found it in the end. It's Chen Yuxin. However, what caught Qin Yang a little off guard was that Chen Yuxin was actually pulled by Subai, a psychopath, to increase her exposure. In the end, she was inexplicably voted the highest and died. Qin Yang's character was dumbfounded in such a way. The method is completed. Later, he retired after his success, and the rules of this story world began to deal with the traces he left behind, such as dying in the scene, in full view of the public, to continue to ensure that the rhythm of the game continues. Subai kept taking deep breaths. Now, he wanted to understand one thing, that is, what did the behavior of Zhao Zhen at the beginning, and Qian Lan later, mean? In fact, there is a knot in Subai's heart, that is, when he just came to the story world, opened the door of his room and faced Zhao Zhen across the corridor, he deliberately made a fake attack posture. Zhao Zhen, after being fooled, he came over with a knife and stabbed Subai in the thigh, but Zhao Zhen could still go out and show off his power as if nothing had happened. Shouldn't he also have injuries? He was injured at that time, and no matter how stupid a person is, he should know what it is, but he always perfectly interpreted the highest state of brainlessness, until he was voted to death in the end. Now it seems that it is actually very simple. Zhao Zhen is actually a ghost. His task assigned by the rules of this story world is to attract attention before the first round of voting, and then become the person voted in the first round. Became an example to familiarize everyone with the set of game rules, and made a set of standard demonstration actions. Zhao Zhen may not know these things himself, but somewhere down the line, his fate has been determined. Even without Subai, he would still provoke others, or deliberately find trouble. After all, from the perspective of game fairness, it would be too unfair if the person who died during the demonstration was an audience, so using a ghost to demonstrate and serve as an example would be the best thing. As for Qian Lan, Subai didn't know whether she was a ghost or not, and couldn't analyze it, but Zhao Zhen must be a ghost. Subai walked into the bathroom and started to pour cold water on his face. Now all kinds of thoughts were constantly burning in his mind and stirring in his consciousness. He knew that he had to put everything aside quickly. Straighten things out and understand them better than the rules, because I don't have much time. In each round, 2 listeners are selected for a duel. At what level does this duel exist? Go to the other side to stir up trouble, and then vote people to death? Are you deliberately fanning the flames? To deliberately sow discord? Subai put a wet towel on his face. No. Impossible. It shouldn't be like this. If it were done this way, everything would be too complicated. It would be unbelievably complicated, and it cannot be accomplished in one voting interval. It cannot even be accomplished in 5 or 6 voting periods. If the rules of this story are arranged like this, then the difficulty has risen from elementary school math problems to college advanced math problems, and two people who can travel back and forth spend a huge amount of time on their respective sides to sow discord and vote to kill each other. What about the others? Have other listeners just been there to make soy sauce? There should be a more direct way. Chen Yuxin was voted to death, and Qin Yang had completed his mission. In fact, as long as one of the other shuttlers died, it would be fine. Include. In the hotel, in the scene. Kill him directly in your own way. If Qin Yang killed Chen Yuxin in the scene, he would also die, but Chen Yuxin was really dead, he was relieved, and he successfully completed the task, but because Chen Yuxin was voted to death, Qin Yang had to be terrorized again. The radio goes through a cutscene and dies. Huh. Subai kept gasping for air, and his thoughts finally became clear. The problem now is, Qin Yang just completed his mission and left the story world. So, in this gaming circle, who is the next shuttler? How should I find him? Here, your coffee. Chu Zhao delivered a cup of coffee to Sunur's desk. There is a piece of white paper on Sunur's desk, with many things drawn in circles on it, as well as a lot of analysis and annotations. How's it going? Have you figured it out? Chu Zhao sat down on a bed, looking a little unnatural. I have figured out many of the rules on the surface, but there are some things that I haven't figured out. I always feel that something is missing. The environment we are encountering now is much more complicated than another dimension killing formation. This environment and this world cannot be created by human beings at all. You mean, we met God and were dragged to this place? Chu Zhao stood up. By the way, Sunur, come here, I'm so itchy. Sunur stood up and walked to Chu Zhao. What's wrong? Please scratch it for me, it's a little itchy. Sunur put his hand on Chu Zhao's neck and scratched it, then tore off a large piece of tangerine peel. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 195. Subai, who had almost wet himself, sat on the edge of the bed alone and shook his head. Now the problem has been simplified, that is, to find the shuttler in the opposite circle. Although Subai doesn't know the specific method yet. When the problem is implemented into a specific plan, too much thinking is actually of little use. Subai also knows this. Gradually, Subai felt a sudden lightness on his body, and the clothes on his body dried up. He looked back at the bedside table and found that the wine bottle appeared there again. I know I'm back. This time, Subai seemed very calm. Immediately afterwards, a layer of yellow words appeared on the floor under his feet. Please go to the conference room. Conference room? Subai stretched his waist. Damn it, is there still a vote today? Qin Yang died in the mission scene, doesn't it count? One person is already dead. Can't this round of voting be postponed? Subai's current mood is a bit hateful. He has already figured out many things and obtained enough evidence to reason them out, but now he has to face a very cruel problem. That means I am very likely to have the highest number of votes in this round of voting. In that case, he will face the same ending as Chen Yuxin, that is, he will not be killed by the shuttle on the opposite side, but will be killed by the people on his side. No matter what, as long as he dies, the guy on the opposite side will automatically complete the mission and return. In the real world, it is really unacceptable to think about letting the other party take advantage of it. Arriving at the restaurant, Subai did not go to get anything to eat this time. Instead, he quietly walked into the conference room. In the last row, Lu Tao did not sit down this time, but sat in front. Subai sat down in his original position, rubbing his knuckles on the tabletop of the desk, with a touch of melancholy. When he knew about the birth, he was faced with this situation, the fate of his life, strange indeed. Suddenly, Subai somewhat understood Chen Yuxin's expression after being voted the highest vote. That expression was different from that of Zhao Zhen and Jian Lan. Chen Yuxin was really more unwilling. She was really unwilling to give in, because she knew that she was completely different from those who participated in the vote. Even Chen Yuxin also knew that there were not only listeners here, but also many ghosts who thought they were listeners. Soon, everyone sat down. Qin Yang is dead, Jian Lan is dead, Zhao Zhen is dead, and Chen Yuxin is dead. The number of people is now 16. Obviously, there was a ghost who was removed by the rules of the story, just in time to sew up Qin Yang's appearance. Looking around, Subai couldn't remember who the suddenly missing person was. Knowing that there was no point in continuing to think about it, Subai supported the table with one arm and just leaned on the table. I don't know why, but Subai seems very calm now. Even if he is thrown to death, he is still very calm. There is no such thought in his mind that he wants to hold back. Moreover, the most ridiculous thing is that Subai doesn't know. Of these people in front of me, which ones are real listeners, and which ones are ghosts. Before Subai got sick and wanted to drag Chen Yuxin to die together, it was because he felt that he had no hope. In addition, fortunately, Chen Yuxin was indeed an audience and a shuttler, so from the current perspective, Subai pulled Chen Yuxin to death together. It's not a loss to over with her. But what now? Lu Tao? Su Zhenzhen? Subai is still not sure whether they are humans or ghosts. The rules of the story can create Urk similar to Zhao Zhen's. Naturally, it can also create characters with higher IQs, such as Su Zhenzhen, such as Lu Tao. Ghosts don't know that they are ghosts, and they think they are listeners, or he will actively work for his own survival, which is the most annoying thing. The height of the story rules in this aspect is really staggering. Even the NPC himself does not know that he is an NPC. The voting list appeared. Subai took a pen and glanced at the photos of the 16 people, and then casually checked under Su Zhenzhen's photo. Immediately, the list disappeared. Perhaps it was because of his narrow escape from death before, but this time Subai didn't feel any sense of crisis or excitement, and seemed a little calm. It was going to rain. If the mother wanted to get married, let it go. Soon, the voting results came out. As expected, Subai smiled when he got the list. 14 votes for myself. He was really elected with a high vote. It seems that everyone has no objection to his own death. Immediately afterwards, Subai's eyes fell on another person. This person's name was on the list. His name was Li He. He had 1 vote, and Su Zhenzhen also had 1 vote. That was Subai's own vote. Subai began to search the memories in his mind. Li He, I didn't have much contact with him. The impression he had was that he was a very low-key and shy person. He didn't talk much or communicate very much. He seemed very ordinary every time. Like the kind of person who hides himself, because if you can hide it so realistically, then this is not the audience, this is the Oscar winner. Wait. Subai pinched his eyebrows with his fingers. Li He. 1 ticket. Subai stood up slowly, his eyes began to wander, and finally found Li He's position. A short man, sitting in the corner on the left, was very inconspicuous. When the other party saw Subai, he seemed to be very afraid, and immediately waved his hand and said, I didn't vote for you, I didn't vote for you, I voted for myself. Many people in the conference room were surprised, because Subai was already going to die. How could Li He be so cowardly? However, at this moment, another picture appeared in Subai's mind. When I saw Chu Zhao in the opposite gaming circle, I introduced myself to Chu Zhao as Subai, but Chu Zhao responded naturally, oh, I know your name is Kuman. If Li He is a shuttler, he should be telling himself something that the story rules think others cannot know, so his words and the image of his expression have been modified by the story rules. Otherwise, no one would suddenly be so abrupt and cowardly as to say such a thing at this moment. After all, he is the one who is going to die. But, why aren't you dead yet? Subai was a little stunned. Not only Subai, but everyone else felt a little stunned, that is, it seemed that the waiting time this time was a bit too long. Soon, another blank piece of paper appeared on the table. This was the first time that two blank pieces of paper appeared in one meeting. There are very few words on the white paper, and the meaning is very simple. Because someone has died in this round, the person with the highest number of votes in this round will not die. Everyone was in an uproar. How could this be the result? So what is the meaning of this round of voting? Many people immediately stood up and prepared to leave, not even daring to look at Subai. Obviously, the scene of Subai and Chen Yuxin dying together was too frightening. They were afraid that Subai would find them and fall in love with each other, and they themselves. I felt that even if Subai randomly found someone to die with him now, it would be difficult to find the wrong person. After all, except Li He, everyone else voted for Subai. However, Subai stood calmly and watched the other audience members quickly leave the conference room. He seemed particularly quiet. Li He did not leave the conference room in a hurry, but continued to stay here. Subai's eyes narrowed slightly, and his hand was already on the Hellfire shotgun on his waist. Li He is a shuttler in the opposite gaming circle, and it is already an inseparable matter. So, all I have to do now is kill him. You can then return to the real world. Even if your mission is completed, everything will eventually end and you can escape from this damn mind-consuming game. Can someone kill someone in a hotel? Or do I have to wait until the scene? Killing someone in a hotel. Is that possible? Subai now had a battle between heaven and man in his mind. However, he remembered the voting list this time. Fortunately, the story rules this time said that because Qin Yang died in this round, no one would die in this round of voting, otherwise Subai would not die now. It has become a corpse, and its soul will be expelled to this ghost place forever like Zhao Zhen, Chen Yuxin, and the others. This result is simply countless times more painful than being cut into pieces by 1,000 cuts. In terms of scene, I don't know how the story rules will be arranged in the next scene. Subai doesn't know yet. If he and Li He are not arranged together, but are far apart, or in other words, this Li He already knows that he is a shuttler. With his identity, when the time comes, he will face even more dangers. This was because Subai was not willing to take risks if he could capture a large number of listeners who were hostile to him and put them in the scene to kill people, but he was not very sure. It's just that this Li He didn't leave yet and gave himself so much time to think. Subai couldn't understand. If you use your own thoughts to speculate on Li He's thoughts, that is, if you use yourself to save others, is Li He also considering whether to kill himself here, a guy who is still missing an arm? Do both people mean the same thing? Subai took a few steps forward. He was sitting in the last row, but was blocked by the door of the conference room. Then he took out his Hellfire shotgun, pointed forward, and approached directly. Li He. Li He's body was trembling, but his face looked particularly resolute. Then he spread his hands and chanted a spell, and shouted. Your name is Subai, right? I want to see if you die or I die. Come on, let's give it a try. The living people leave here. Those who die are considered unlucky. Even if the soul falls here forever, it doesn't matter. Subai no longer hesitated, and quickly approached Li He in a flash. The muzzle of the Hellfire shotgun was pressed against Li He's eyebrows. At the same time, a cold smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. It seems that I am faster than you. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 196. Li He looked at Subai angrily. Subai's originally sharp eyes became softer and softer. Even with a little timidity. Yes. Cowardice. When this kind of gaze appears on a mental patient, it is obviously very abnormal. Sudbai's hand is also shaking. The finger that was originally intended to pull the trigger becomes extremely weak at this moment, and it seems that he can't press it no matter what. Go down. In the end, Sudbai seemed to have been slowly drained of all his energy, and a look of helplessness appeared on his face. However, it seemed that when his momentum dropped to a low point, Sudbai suddenly gritted his teeth and roared. Boom! Gunshots were fired. Hidden main mission completed, return to the real world. Reward 1, restore everything, including the equipment brought into the story world. PS, only the equipment redeemed from the WeChat store will be restored. Reward 2, 300 story point reward. Reward 3, you can enter the previously entered story world once, time, 3 hours. Kinhuangdao is a seaside city. Different from the seaside urban agglomerations in the Yangtze River Delta and the Pearl River Delta, Kinhuangdao naturally has a big gap with the first two in terms of urban construction and economy, but it has naturally retained its. There are many features that should belong to a coastal city, and therefore, Kinhuangdao has become a good place for tourism and vacation. It was night, the wind here was salty and wet, and the temperature difference between day and night was obvious. Sudbai was walking on the beach of Kinhuangdao alone in a thin coat. This is considered a community. There is a pier next to the community. The pier is not very big. In fact, it is not at the same level as Shanghai Nantung, which is located at the estuary of the Yangtze River. But because of this, it has not been able to really disturbing the tranquility of this beach. This is not a specific scenic spot like Lalongtu. This is an urban area. It is extremely valuable to be able to retain the tranquility of the sea and beach here. Next to Sudbai, there was a young mother playing with her child on the beach. The little boy was holding a small plastic shovel and a plastic bucket in his hands, and kept digging sand. The mother was squatting aside to look after her child, and she didn't notice that the back of her pants and top were all gone. Fortunately, Sudbai was walking behind her. Fortunately, Sudbai couldn't hold that thought in her heart at this time. Flying from Shanghai to Beijing, and then taking the high-speed train to Kinhuangdao, the distance was long but the time was not very long. Considering Sudbai's current physique and physical condition, he would not feel tired. But at this moment, his figure looked extremely desolate. Sudbai was not a high-spirited type, but he was far from being depressed. His current state was an extremely rare episode in his life. Sudbai squatted down on the beach and lit a cigarette. He puffed out smoke rings lonelily facing the sea. Suddenly, a sentence that sounded very cliché came to mind. What I smoked was not cigarettes, but loneliness. Sudbai now. It's really lonely. The monk was much later than the scheduled time. He was not wearing a cassock, but a yellow kung fu suit. He looked very handsome. In fact, he did not look very old, only about 27 or 80 years old. It was just that he had always been. He likes to wear cassocks, so he looks a bit old-fashioned and serious, which makes people unconsciously think of his age. The monk walked to Sudbai's side and said nothing. Sudbai shook off the ashes and simply sat directly on the beach. This beach has man-made traces after all, this is a city. There are tall buildings 100 meters away. It is naturally impossible to have an original natural landscape, but in fact, sometimes natural landscapes it is not more comfortable and pleasant with a little artificial influence. Monk, I came to talk to you. Sudbai threw the cigarette butt into the sea. The Dead Sea did not care about the warning sign next to it prohibiting littering. The poor monk knows. The monk also sat cross-legged. The two grown men sat on the beach facing the sea together. I used to, how should I put it, I really looked down on you. The monk said nothing. Because you are such a deep city. Everyone can plot and plot. No matter what I do with you, it's boring. Sudbai spread his hands and propped himself up on the beach. The sand was very soft. There is still a little warmth left. I don't like this. I always feel that sometimes, it is better to be simpler and pure. The poor monk understands that you actually carry that violent gene in your bones. Sudbai nodded. I'm sick, really, mentally ill. If I hadn't encountered the terrorist broadcast, to be honest, I would have become the most wanted criminal who committed crimes in 2 years. I might be caught and the court would be broadcast to announce the verdict. You may also have to go into exile abroad, or even go to places like Africa or the Middle East. What happened? Sudbai was silent for a while, and told all his experiences in the last story world exactly. When there were no conflicts of interests, the monk could still be relied on, and these knots and inner thoughts of his own seemed to be gone now. I can only ask the monk to talk about it. After all, they are desperados in the same boat. Moreover, Sudbai has very few people in this world who are relevant and can speak his mind. Maybe you didn't feel it before, but one day, you suddenly wake up and feel the loneliness of being alone and abandoned by the whole world, which can really make people feel trembling from the bottom of their hearts. After listening to Sudbai's narration, the monk thought for a while and said, the poor monk thinks that the story world this time is very exciting, and it also reflects the changes after the horror broadcast was stopped for 3 months. The poor monk is probably about to usher in his own life. The next story is about to begin. With your experience and feelings this time, I have some preparations and mental preparations. I owe you a favor. Damn it, I'm not here to find you for your worthless favor. You're just a piece of shit that can trick anyone. I don't dare to ask for the favor you owe me, for fear that you'll trick me to death, then stand in front of my grave and say again, this time I owe you a bigger favor. The monk didn't take Sudbai's ridicule seriously. In fact, the monk was really well educated. When Sudbai overturned the table when he was protecting the child in the fox's belly, the monk actually watched it all happen silently. Not even a single curse word was used. From this point of view, whether it is the monk, Gyatso, or the fat man, they all seem to have a much better advantage than Sudbai. After they have really deceived each other, they can still sit together to eat and chat and continue to discuss the next step. Sudbai can't. Sudbai's patience is indeed horribly low sometimes, and the state of wanting to get sick from time to time is really not suitable for this kind of team cooperation model that needs to be wary of each other. You still shot in the end, the monk said slowly. It proves that in your heart, you actually love yourself more. Nonsense. Sudbai grabbed a handful of sand and threw it forward. This is human nature. He is your friend, not your parents or family. You don't have that kind of lifelong friendship. You just grew up playing together and have a good relationship, that's all. When faced with this kind of interpersonal relationship, it is understandable that you choose to shoot in order to protect yourself and keep yourself alive at the critical moment. I believe that if it was your relative, your immediate family member, or someone who had sacrificed his life to save you, given your character, you would really rather die than shoot him. Besides, he's not really him. Of course, your focus is not whether he is real or not. Your focus is clear to me. It is you who shot your friend. Sudbai clapped his hands and didn't speak in a hurry. The monk continued, actually, for us, it is very necessary to cut off the interpersonal relationships in the real world. Really, you have an advantage in this aspect. Sorry, the following words may be a bit taboo. Sudbai, both of your parents died when you were young, so your character is more mature than ordinary people. You are even more carefree, with no pressure to survive or goals to strive for. You have a lot of money and there is very little pressure. In fact, during the more than 10 or nearly 20 years that you have lived alone after losing your parents, your living situation determines your character and many of your psychological habits. In the story world, you often encounter levels that test the listener's character. You often have a greater advantage than ordinary listeners. You are still blaming yourself for that shot, feeling that you have lost a friend, feeling that you betrayed a friend, and feeling sorry for a friend. In fact, these are just like the afterglow of the setting sun, they are your last hypocrisy. The monk stood up at this time, reached out and patted Sudbai on the shoulder, and then said sadly, "One day, you will become exactly the same as the poor monk, and become like the poor monk, which you originally hated. Because what terrorist broadcasts want is actually this kind of people. Most of the people who are not this kind of people are dead." After saying that, the monk put his hands together, pinched the lotus flower, and recited a section of the calming mantra to Sudbai. Sudbai let go of his mind and allowed the monk's own spirit to influence him. In the end, Sudbai slowly closed his eyes and lay down on the soft beach. The monk turned around and left directly. His matter on Kinhuang Island was not over yet. He had to settle it before his next story came. He had to find time to come out and talk to Sudbai for a while and give him the mental massage was a way of repaying the favor last time in the story world when Sudbai brought several of his cripples back from the top of the mountain. Sudbai slept until the dawn of the next day. The light of the morning sun had already fallen down and shone on Sudbai's body, giving him a warm feeling. The coldness brought by sleeping on the beach all night was also there. At this time, they were dispersed to pieces. Sudbai took out his mobile phone from his pocket and dialed Chu Zhao's number. The other party answered slowly. "Hey, Sudbai, you are finally willing to call me, ahem." Chu Zhao was still drinking. Apparently, he had been drinking for another night. "Drink less, it will hurt your health," Sudbai said. "Stop talking nonsense to me. You owe me an explanation. Come on, come on." "I don't owe you anything." Sudbai's eyes gradually became calmer. Although in the previous story world, Sudbai shot and killed a ghost exactly like Chu Zhao. But at the moment of shooting, Sudbai couldn't deceive himself. At that time, he really thought he was Chu Zhao and shot him to death because Li He's reaction at that time was too abnormal. Obviously, the terrorist broadcast had changed. The ghost named Chu Zhao also said what he thought was the ghost of Chu Zhao. For example, what Li He actually said at that time was, "Sudbai, I am Chu Zhao." But what Sudbai was watching and listening to was, "Come on, beat me to death." Sudbai knew this in his heart at that time. Hanging up the phone, he felt a little melancholy at the same time, because after returning to the real world, Sudbai contacted Chu Zhao but failed to contact Sunur. She seemed to have disappeared from the world. Even the embassy and the country were concerned about this. Without any reaction or awareness. Of course Sudbai knew what this meant. This is a mission to return to the real world in batches. Sudbai can only do it now. Sunur is entering as an experiencer. As long as he endures it, in the end, according to the habit of horror broadcasts, he should not go out of his way to experience it. Ors. Damn, hang up on me again. In the bedroom, Chu Zhao was lying among a circle of wine bottles, and he threw his phone out angrily. The phone fell on the floor with a crisp sound, and the screen shattered. However, the phone rang at this time. "Welcome to the horror radio show. I am the host of the show. I have no name, because here, names have no meaning at all." "Damn, what the hell?" Chu Zhao burped and shouted.